Welcome, everyone. Effective communication is essential for maintaining trust and credibility, especially when the stakes are high. In today's webinar, we will explore key strategies and best practices for managing communications, especially during a crisis. My name is Stephen Sugar, and I'm with the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy Board of Directors. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Melanie Sloan. Melanie is a partner with Summer Strategies, a public affairs and crisis communications firm. She has an impressive background, having founded and led a government ethics watchdog group, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, D.C. Additionally, Melanie served the assistant for the United States Attorney in the District of Columbia, working with both U.S. House and Senate Judiciary Committees. Excuse me. We are thrilled to have Melanie with us today to share her expertise and insights. So let's dive in. Welcome, Melanie.
Hi, so nice to be here. Thank you for that kind introduction, Stephen. Welcome to all of you. I'm going to be talking about what is effective stakeholder engagement in good and bad times. And if you wouldn't mind just holding your questions till the end, but there will be plenty of time for questions. So first off, I wonder why I cannot move a slide. There we go. Why does stakeholder engagement matter? Physical therapy boards exist at the intersection of multiple stakeholder interests, and it's important that you have effective engagement to build trust, compliance, and professional advancement. Engagement quality directly impacts public health outcomes, and strategic communication is essential in both routine operations and crisis situations. First off, it's important to understand who your stakeholders are. So you want to map that. You want to identify and prioritize who are the stakeholders who you are trying to influence. And you need to assess their influence and interest, evaluating each group's impact and your impact on those groups. You also need to think about the information needs of each group, understanding the specific needs of the group and the channels of communication that they often use. And finally, it's important to recognize cultural differences that might have different communication preferences. I think in your case, we're engaging licensed professionals, both PTs, PTAs, and applicants, the educational institutions that you work with, students, the media, hopefully not as often, but media, news, and information channels, obviously healthcare facilities, regulatory partners, other government agencies, and then patients and public advocates. When you are building a stakeholder communications plan, you need to analyze the current state of your situation. What kind of channels do you have already? What kind of engagement level do you have? Then you want to set clear objectives for those for your communications, defining measurable goals for your different stakeholder groups. And you want to schedule regular touches with different groups, whether that's like monthly newsletters, for example. You might want to have regular tweets, Facebook posts, all sorts of different ways that you can choose to engage with folks. And over time, you want to measure and refine those, tracking your engagement metrics, and which means seeing what was more effective, what wasn't, what's your open rate on your emails. Do people respond to your Twitter posts or Facebook or Instagram for that matter? It's always important to consider what your stakeholder concerns are and then learn from your past interactions with them and when you consider what you should do next. Then it's important to think about the core principles of effective engagement: consistency, transparency, inclusivity, and responsiveness. So consistency, for example, means having regular, predictable communication. So for example, that might be a monthly newsletter or regular Facebook posts. Certainly when there are new developments, that's a great way to have a touch. And if there's, I don't know how often new developments come out, but if that's a regular thing, you could either have it in the newsletter or maybe some kind of Instagram related to that. It's important to be transparent about your communications. Try to be as clear as possible. There's often this thing in the communications world, explain it like I'm five. Don't use really complicated language with a lot of legal or medical jargon, because that is harder for people to understand. And the goal is to be as clear and concise as possible. Also, be very responsive, timely acknowledgement of when other people reach out back to you. It's important to respond quickly and clearly and kindly. And again, always being inclusive, thinking about multiple channels for diverse stakeholders. Different people really communicate different ways. Some people really will use a lot of Facebook, but that's, older clientele, whereas younger people are more likely to be found on Instagram. And I don't know if any of you use TikTok, but obviously that's even more popular for the younger crowd. So it's worth exploring whether you can find your ways into things like TikTok to expand your audience. Obviously, there's a lot of legal considerations in your communications as state agencies. You likely have confidentiality requirements. Let me say, from my own background as a lawyer, you've got to really think hard about open meetings laws and open records laws. Think about what kind of communications, and I can't really emphasize this seriously enough, what kind of communications you're putting in writing. Think about your email. Email is forever and can easily come back to haunt you. If you would not want to see your email in the Washington Post or your local paper, do not write that email. That is an email that's a mistake. And if you are about to have a conversation that you think is a little dicier, it is so much smarter to pick up the phone. I know so many people, particularly lawyers, who really don't use email. That what they do and say is, please call me. And remember that all of your records are subject to, so many of your records, not all, are going to be subject to open records laws. And if there is ever any kind of scandal or something bad happens, that one of the first things people will do is go and look for those records. And whether it's just an advocacy group who's looking to embarrass somebody or it's in litigation, those email records are pretty trying. Also, I think you have to be very careful about the use of something like Signal or other apps like that. While I'm not familiar with each of your state laws, some state laws do require that all records be preserved, all professional records, whether you're using them no matter what medium you're using. So for example, even if you were using Signal or your own personal email, if you were doing something in your professional context on those email, that would eventually be discoverable through the open records laws. Similarly, you have open meetings laws in every state, and be cognizant of what kind of public access there is to board deliberations, and also make sure that you're not violating that access to that public access, because that too can end up with litigation. Obviously, there's due process issues and then ADA compliance issues. So these are all the kind of legal things that you need to worry about also when you're communicating. And I'm sure most of you are, in touch with your own lawyers about that, but those are just some of the things that come to my mind. Then there's a lot of technology tools that you can use for engagement. There are a bunch of customer relationship management systems that can really help you. Obviously, there's things like we're using now, video conferencing platforms like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and Google Meet for virtual meetings and workshops. There is project management software like Asana, Trello, and Monday.com for tracking progress and responsibilities. There's cloud collaboration tools like Google Workspace for real-time document collaboration, and Slack, Discord, and Microsoft Teams for instant messaging and Teams communication, because obviously you're communicating with your own team as well as people external to your organization. Then when you're thinking about feedback and input, there are survey platforms that you can engage, something like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics or Google Forms. Then there are polling tools that are also sometimes useful, like Poll Everywhere for real-time input during meetings. You can use digital whiteboards and idea management platforms. Then there's also analysis and reporting. There are data visualization tools like Tableau. for presenting information clearly, and social listening tools like Brandwatch and Sprout Social for monitoring online conversations. Then for customer relationship management, often Salesforce is a big one that a lot of people use for managing stakeholder relationships on an ongoing basis. And then there are some kinds of automated reporting tools for sharing progress updates. Um, uh, Community building is also super important. And some of the ways I think that's great to use that is strategic use of social media. I had mentioned Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, but I didn't mention LinkedIn earlier. LinkedIn is great for professional updates and regulatory guidance, as well as continuing education. Twitter and X is often good for time-sensitive announcements. Also, there's now Blue Sky, which is another one that is frequently used. Facebook for community building, public perception, and event promotion. Instagram is great for visual storytelling, highlighting PT success stories. Humanizing the board could also be another way to do that. Um, When you're using social media, it's important to have clear guidelines for official communications, protocols for responding to inquiries that are given to you via social media channels. And you need to have some documentation procedures for record keeping. And, always important to keep personal and professional accounts separate. Um, Um, One thing that I think can be really helpful is to consider the role of humor in professional communications. There are a lot of benefits to this. You can humanize the regulatory body and increase people's ability to retain what you're saying. Obviously, there's a risk that somebody could misperceive it and you could be viewed as a lack of seriousness. So, on a really serious issue, you might not use it. But it has a great application for educational content and health promotion. And as a major guideline, use basically self-deprecating humor and make sure it aligns with your organizational tone. A couple of great examples that I like where we've seen this kind of thing, and I'm going to try to do this on PowerPoint, hope it works. This is from TSA, did this. This was a rock, paper, scissors video they did. And what they were trying to point out here was that don't pack your scissors. It's all fun and games until you pack your scissors and your scissors are too big. So they were using this really cute interaction between someone on a plane and someone on the ground to highlight how important it was not to pack scissors. And they had huge engagement on this. But I think they had more than 1 million views, and it got press stories as well. So it was a really positive interaction. Another similar one, the CDC did something called Preparedness 101 for the zombie apocalypse. And I'm not going to show it to you now, but I left on the bottom is that they even made a whole YouTube video about what to do for the zombie apocalypse. But really what they were trying to do was tell you to make sure you have food and water and emergency contacts and a bunch of other things in case of things like hurricanes. But this too got a fair amount of attention because people like to talk about the zombie apocalypse. So one of the things that I am particularly well versed in and that I do a lot of work in is crisis communications. And there are a bunch of different kind of crises that you are most likely to face. And I'm probably not telling you anything because maybe many of you have already faced some of these, but disciplinary actions against high-profile practitioners, controversial regulatory changes, public safety incidents involving licensed professionals, misinformation about the scope of practice, sometimes a natural disaster affecting healthcare delivery, or legal actions against the board, which could be lawsuits regarding challenging board authority or decisions, antitrust litigation, due process claims, administrative appeals of license denials or sanctions, open records or transparency litigation, employment actions by former board staff, or Americans with Disabilities compliance challenges, which are also something we know a little bit about. So one of the things when you're thinking about crises is by the time a crisis hits, you want to have thought about the issues of crises before. So one of the most important things is to have your crisis communication team structure already in place. You really want to know who are the people who can make decisions, decision-making authority chain. And you want to have some pre-approved messaging templates and have had a spokesperson have training for dealing with a crisis, have somebody who's designated as a spokesperson, and also make sure that person has had some media training so that they're prepared to be a spokesperson. Um, don't have a spokesperson who doesn't like to speak publicly. That won't be helpful to you. Um, and you want to make sure that you have those people, somebody who is in place to, who has the final say and has authority to make a final decision when a crisis comes, because you don't want to be reaching around trying to find somebody, getting board approval for a final statement if you are in a hurry. During a crisis, it's important to have acknowledgement protocols, gather information, procedures to gather information quickly, prioritize which stakeholders you're going, a framework for how you're going to prioritize speaking to stakeholders, consistent update schedules, and you need to be able to coordinate with other agencies. And one thing that I just don't think I can highlight enough is that it's important to apologize. The power of taking responsibility cannot be oversold, really. In almost every situation, people understand that mistakes happen, but never say mistakes were made, because mistakes were made means nobody made a mistake. It just sort of happened. It's not a mistakes were made situation. You want somebody to say, I made a mistake. We made a mistake. There was a problem. Acknowledge an error. Don't wait for escalation, because a situation will only escalate if people feel like somebody isn't taking responsibility for a mistake. It's important to be specific and authentic. Again, no generic apologies of mistakes were made kind of thing. You have to say specifically what went wrong, who was affected, and understand that you understand that somebody was impacted by this, and express empathy for that harm. And there also needs to be real remorse. So say that I'm sorry. There's lots of evidence that people feel, you sort of take the wind out of people's sails when you say you got something wrong and you're fixing it. But that's the other part. You have to immediately couple your apology with corrective action. It's, we know we made a mistake and we're sorry, but here's what we're doing to fix that, so that people can see that there is a series of things you're doing to make this situation better. So there have to be real concrete steps. And again, it's about accepting consequences, recognizing harm, and saying, here, we're doing things that we're gonna make this a lot better. And to think about a couple of real world examples about this, there was a situation in the California Board of Registered Nursing had a crisis with some licensing processing delays back in 2019. And this was affecting new nursing graduates and nurses transferring their licenses from other states. The delays were particularly challenging because there was a nursing shortage in California at many healthcare facilities at the time. And the Bureau faced a lot of criticism about this. So their stakeholder management approach included publicly acknowledging the delays through official communications and board meetings. They implemented a process status tracking system on their website where applicants could check their application status. They temporarily increased staffing to address the backlog of applications. They prioritized certain applications based on workforce needs and employer requests. They engaged with nursing schools and healthcare employers to communicate realistic timelines. And they published updated processing timeframes to set appropriate expectations. So it's not that this made everybody, it was not a kumbaya moment where everybody was completely happy, but they did take responsibility and they addressed the situation, and that helped make the situation, that improved the situation dramatically. Similarly, during Hurricane Florence in 2018, the North Carolina Medical Board implemented several communication strategies to address the emergency situation. They temporarily modified licensing requirements to allow out-of-state medical professionals to provide assistance in affected areas. They created a dedicated section of their website with hurricane-related information and resources for licensees, including guidance on temporary practice locations and prescription refills. They sent email notifications to licensees with updates about emergency policies and procedures. And they coordinated with the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services and other state agencies to ensure consistent messaging about healthcare delivery during the disaster. So those are just some of the ways that you can that other folks have tried to mitigate difficult situations. Future trends in stakeholder communication. We're seeing more and more personalization. There is AI-driven content customized to individual stakeholders. I'll just warn you, AI is obviously so many people are using it, and we're going to see more and more usage of it. It lies and makes mistakes. So you have to be really careful about the information that it credibly will tell you. I'll just to give you a funny story about it. Even as I was preparing for this presentation, I was trying to look up some humorous situations that licensing boards and places had used to convey information in a humorous fashion. And it gave me a very detailed something about how the California board had used this explain it like I'm five, and it included huge examples. It translated some of the regulations into other language, and then it gave metrics and everything for how this had been received. And then I started looking around on the web to find more information about how the Colorado board had used this, and I couldn't find anything. So then I asked the AI, "And is this true?" And the answer was, no, this isn't true. You only want true examples. So it also found for me several fake examples of crises. So I just want to warn you, and with a lot of great detail that made it look like, well, of course you would buy this. So you really have to be careful if you're using AI about the accuracy of what you're using. Also, something that we see more of will be immersive technologies, virtual reality for training and interactive experiences, real-time feedback, continuous improvement through instant engagement data, and predictive analysis to try and figure out what stakeholder needs are before they arise. We're also seeing more and more natural language processing, advanced sentiment analysis to better understand stakeholder concerns, and new kinds of engagement approaches, such as micro-engagement, which are brief, frequent touch points rather than occasional major consultations, real-time feedback loops, which is continual stakeholder input rather than just periodic surveys, something called gamification, which is interactive models to increase participation and maintain engagement. And so those are some of the kinds of things you can expect to be seeing. And then we're having, changing stakeholder expectations over time. People are demanding greater participation. They want more meaningful participation. They want genuine influence, not just to be sent information. So they are expecting that if you're sending them information, that they respond to that information, that you will respond again. It can't all be a one-way street. People are looking for a lot of two-way meaningful contact. Privacy concerns are critical. I'm sure in your field, more than most, but there's a growing expectation for the ethical handle of engagement data. And obviously, one of the ways that I could see a crisis coming up is some kind of ransomware attack or the loss of some kind of privacy. I will say that I think, Americans are pretty used to at this point getting the letter that your data has been compromised. So it's perhaps not quite the scandal it once was, but if somebody's data is going to be harmed, that is definitely a crisis you're going to have to be prepared to handle. And you should probably sort of have in mind already what you would say, some plans for that, because that is such a daily part of our life and now with constant breaches, computer breaches. And then a greater emphasis on reaching all stakeholder groups equitably. And those, I think, are some of the major things that you should know about. So the key takeaways are: know your stakeholders, follow core principles of consistency, transparency, responsiveness, accountability, and be prepared for a crisis before it comes on. If you have never thought about a crisis before you have one, you have definitely missed the boat on that. And then measure results so you can track your engagement and see how you're doing with engagement so that you can improve it. And with that, I am happy to answer questions that you may have.
Great. You can feel free to unmute your mic or put your question in the chat. Happy to take any questions that you may have. Melanie, thank you. I have a question for you. Tell me about the process of what happens when you wrong a stakeholder. For example, a stakeholder reaches out to you with specific questions and they get a form letter back. Yeah, we take your questions very seriously. Thank you for contacting me. Feel free to reach out again, type of a thing, where it didn't answer any of the questions and the individual sits there and feels like they've been wronged. Like, I asked specific questions, I didn't get an answer. Um, how do you recuperate that when you hear feedback of, hey, by the way, you're not engaging with your stakeholders?
Well, so what the downside for you of that particularly is that somebody who's upset by that may well post that. They're going to take that letter and they're going to post it on Twitter and they're going to post it on Instagram and they're going to be making videos. So I would try and avoid such a thing. I would definitely try to avoid sending such letters. And that's, I think, one of the things I was talking about is that people are looking for more personalized engagement. And you may well have form letters for something that is a question that you get all the time. But I think it is important to have somebody, reading the questions that they're getting and making sure that the responses are, in fact, are on point. And if then you see somebody got the form letter and it happened anyway, and then you see that they are unhappy, somebody should pick up the phone and reach out and say, I'm sorry, that wasn't the answer that you deserved. And let's see if we can get your question answered. And if I am not the right person, I will get you to the right person. So it goes back to, again, people really want to be heard. And that's an easy situation where a phone call and an apology is probably going to get you a long way to sorting out the problem.
Great. Let's take a look any in the chat. There's nothing in the chat. Anyone else have any other questions? Feel free to unmute.
Hi, this is Sonora Simpson. I'm interested in what we can do to ensure that we're following the accommodation requirements for ADA regarding how things are written and published, because I don't think a lot of people realize that, for instance, PDFs can't be read, etc., and we're not following the rule for making particularly written information accessible, but all kinds. So just as we used to have to provide for signers, there are now issues that we really should be aware of for accommodations for persons with disability.
Right, absolutely. That is a very big issue. And I would think, but I don't know this, that because you all are part of state governments, this would be part of that the state government would have this, they have the same requirements sort of across the board, so that somewhere in the council's office for the state, maybe in the there would be a legal office that would already have responsibility for these kinds of issues and would have guidance so that everybody across the board, across the state, in every agency was handling this appropriately. And if not, this is ripe for litigation. And so if you all hire your own legal counsel, I would definitely, there are lawyers who have a robust practice in ADA compliance to make sure that you are getting all of this right. But it's definitely worth checking with lawyers to make sure, because as ADA lawsuits it's an easy lawsuit if somebody is violating that. And as you know, the FSBPT recently had to deal with some ADA issues, and it's always it's better to address it ahead of time. So it's a great question that you raise.
Well, I'm not finding that to be true. And so I was thinking that for the boards that actually they ensure that all the members of the board understand it, because even when you get into chapters for the APTA chapters, a lot of their information it needs to be adjusted to, and to ensure that they're following ADA rules. I think we've sort of lost it in getting with other things. And so that's why I'm really concerned that the persons with disability, and especially nowadays that we're in a different world now. And there's going to be a lot of people who need information, particularly about licensure, et cetera, and people that are being fired, etc. So we've got to make sure that everybody knows that they can get the information and that it's easily available. For instance, for the District of Columbia, you have to be a detective to figure out where a lot of the information is about the boards. And I'm sure the state is not the only state.
Thank you, Sonora. I have a question here in the chat. Do you have any recommendations for the best, in quotes, measures for, quotes, customer satisfaction and also for stakeholder engagement? Kind of talking about surveys or ways to measure your stakeholders' engagement. Any thoughts on that?
Um, I guess it depends on, which stakeholders you're talking about, and it's worth doing a survey to try and ask your different stakeholders about their engagement and whether they're satisfied with what you're doing. And you can do things that are not costly, like you can do a Survey Monkey that doesn't even cost you. I think you can use it for free if you want to, that you can come up with surveys. So you could, think through what kinds of communications you already are using, and what kind of things you're thinking of. And you could, your open rate won't be amazing. Not everybody will take your survey, but if you keep it reasonably short, you could include it on perhaps on a newsletter that you already do, and highlight it, and say that you're looking for ways to increase engagement, and you really want to hear from folks, and make sure to do the survey, but also make sure to leave room for other comments. Like, don't just ask multiple choice questions, but ask if people have other input, because you might really learn something helpful.
Any other questions that there may be, or feel free to put them in the chat or unmute. Raise your hand if you want to. I have one other question that I wrote down when you were talking about that. I was listening to you talking about building that stakeholder plan, and that just reminded me of like strategic planning and how those are integrated kind of in there with that. And question on should you or how should you rather prioritize your stakeholders? So there may be some stakeholders that you want to hear more from, and is there any actions that you should do, or should you do that with some stakeholders? So.
Well, I mean, I do think you have to prioritize stakeholders. There are going to be some folks that are more important to you than others, and it's not that you should devalue folks, but you want to make sure that the most important stakeholders to you are because everybody only has so much time in a day, are the people that you are engaging with at the highest level. And maybe you have more frequent communication with those folks, and you might want to communicate with them in a couple of different ways. The general public probably, for example, is not your highest priority. Frankly, that's just, it's not that you don't care about them, but that's not really who's looking. They're not looking to you on a regular basis to say, and what does my state physical therapy board have to say today, right? So that's just not your top. Whereas the people who are applying, for example, for licenses, they probably are a high one, and I would assume also some of the educational facilities also probably are. So those would be places I think it's important to prioritize and analyze, and then think about what the level of communication all of those folks need.
Great. Thank you. All right. Looking over in the chat, there's nothing there. Any other questions? Feel free to. Got a question in the chat here, came up. How effective are quarterly or annual newsletters from state agencies to stakeholders? And how do you restrict the content to accurate information only, such as not doing a Q&A that may exceed the law?
So on a quarterly, if you're not doing a Q&A, I assume that means like you're doing something verbal, like you're holding a Zoom or something like that, rather than putting out some kind of report. I mean, I would think it'd be more useful to put out, say, something monthly than quarterly. And if you just put out something once a year, I think people aren't going to really read that. That doesn't seem like that's not really engaging with your stakeholders. If you put together an annual report anyway, for some reason, I suppose you could send it out to people, but my guess is that there's a very low open rate for material like that. And what you're hoping to gain with stakeholder engagement is to have some more of a give and take, so that the better relationship you have with the give and take, if problems do come up, they will not escalate as much. Because just think about it in your own life. It's a lot easier. You don't get as angry with or upset with people and so if you and you're more willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. So it's better to engage with people a little more and just have those more general touches. And they don't have to be sort of big and grand, but just reaching out and even like a monthly newsletter and if there's additional updates, say, hey, we have this other piece of information we want to share with you. I figure some of you probably do have Facebook pages, that should be updated regularly. If you're going to have social media, don't let it go too stale. It doesn't look good if it's, something your Facebook page has last been updated 6 months ago.
Great. Anything else any other questions that we may have? Sandra, go ahead and unmute. Are you there?
Yes, I'm on mute. I apologize. My fan is
No.
in the background. I hope you can't hear it.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Sandra from Montana here. Kind of following up on the previous question. I feel like I have relatively quiet boards that I help manage, that there's not really a lot new happening or a lot to say. But I liked what you just said, Melanie, about you're not as likely to get upset with people that you know well. So it kind of is a case for engaging more often. But I'm struggling to kind of think when to reach out and what to reach out with if I don't have a lot to say. Do you have any insight or advice on that topic?
Well, certainly, you don't want to just make up stuff to go out with, but I mean, it does seem like there are regulatory updates, things happen changing in the landscape. Like just right now, for example, with the new administration and all of the stuff happening with employees, like federal employees, you might even just be able to say, you know what, I just want you to know, like, this isn't affecting us. These are at the state level. And if this is true, and I don't know, because federal funding comes down to the states as well, like, are you being impacted by any of this? Or similarly, are there going to be people in your community who are impacted if some of you have a lot of, say, federal employees who may be losing their jobs or things like that, people who may not be able to afford their physical therapy, who were previously, I mean, I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and we're seeing things like this happening right now. So there might be situations, and those are just things that come to my mind because they're happening here. But there might be something that affects folks in your area. If you saw on if you're in Montana, if you saw somebody, if you saw something, say, maybe on Twitter or Instagram, and some kind of horse accident, it could give you some kind of way to say, there's physical therapy would be, you could probably come up with some more lighthearted things, assuming nobody was really injured, some kind of lighter way to reach out. So I think it requires a little bit of creativity on what's going on in your state, because these things do matter geographically. And also I want to emphasize that tone changes geographically too. What might play in a big city is not going to play in a small town, and vice versa. People will have different kinds of reactions to different things. So you want to keep that in mind. Humor might play differently in different communities.
Thank you.
Looks like there's some more activity on the chat here. We've got a question here regarding handy tools you prefer on social media posts that make them more impactful. By the way, Jason Kaiser from California added a comment to that as well. Jason out there is pretty adept with the social media as well. But do you have any tools or suggestions to make social media pop to stakeholders?
Well, again, I think that's why I suggested humor, because something that's a little more creative can go a long way. Boring posts are, obviously, sometimes you just have to convey information and that's all there is to it. But if you can, I don't know, people love animal posts. I mean, you just sometimes it just takes somebody who is creative, and maybe your person, Jason, has some great ideas there who he could share. But I think it's just often, finding a engaged social media manager who is obviously often someone, younger than I am too, who spends more time on social thinking about what kind of clever thing you might be able to do.
Great. All right. Any other? Jason has a question. Go ahead, Jason.
Something that I would just add to the idea of, I mean, to the presenter's point, our content is not exactly the most exciting, entertaining content that we need to push out. But one of the things that we can keep in mind is that when you're writing, especially for social media, but even for newsletters, that newsletter may be catering to just more than one stakeholder group. I think sometimes we concentrate on the really obvious ones where it's like licensing population, new applicants, but really our main audience should be that consumer. So we all have content that we wish that our licensing populations knew a little bit more and the consumers might know a little bit more. So, brevity, a little humor, shake it up a little bit, the same post every month, maybe every month and a half apart doesn't look like it's too regurgitated, but you could keep hitting that same message home. And then just the whole nature of social media is just kind of a scrolling, doom scrolling wall that your consumers might not see the first post. It might, you might post it 6 times a year and they only saw 2 anyway. So repetition is pretty important too.
Good.
Yeah, and things people need to know is again worth posting more than once, and I just want to emphasize also, like Jason said, just keep it in simple language. Don't make it in medical or legal jargon. You want it to be as understandable as possible.
Great. There's a tool that's been put into the chat that just talks about making it easier for communication. I'll mispronounce it. Hootsuite, maybe, can schedule posts for a later date. And the feature helps it easier to manage social media. And you can add all the platforms to it and send one message that go to all the platforms. That sounds pretty slick. So great. Thanks for the suggestion there, Jason. So any other questions, comments, or feel free to put them in the chat or unmute. Don't forget the consumer that you're supposed to serve. A comment from Sonora Simpson. Old people, quote, need to know things as well. So very wise statement from Sonora. Thank you for that.
Well, and older people are often on Facebook still, and do get emails. And I don't know how many of you put out newsletters in the mail, but some older people still, the actual mail. That's a large part of your community.
Great.
Probably not TikTok.
Yeah.
No, they do take it out too.
Not my mom and dad, I'll just tell you that.
We do TikTok too. We think it's stupid, but we do it.
Okay.
That's great, Sonora. Thank you. All right. Without anything else, I think we can call this a very successful webinar. Thank you so much, Melanie, for joining us today. Very insightful. Great chat from the folks out there in the audience. Thank you for participating. Really appreciate you for doing that. Melanie Sloan, Summer Strategies, you can see her contact information there. And thank you very much for today,
Absolutely.
Melanie.
And thank you all for taking the time to come. I appreciate it.